This week I'm creating a new headboard. My current headboard is made from old doors, but it's in a farmhouse style, and I decided it's time for an update. I do like the idea of using doors, so I did a quick online search and I found 2 different headboards made of beautiful French doors, but they weren't actually available to purchase. So in the spirit of being addicted to molding, I decided that I would create a headboard inspired by classical moldings. Here's a look at some of my inspiration. This is a molding project that I did in my first home. It has 2 columns, one on each side, topped by a capital, and then at the very top is the header, which is a frieze, and that is topped off with crown molding. So those are all designs that I like and wanted to keep in this project I'm working on now. This is similar in design with 2 columns and a frieze and crown molding at the top. It's just used as door trim instead of surrounding a mirror. Here's another example of door casing that's classical and ornate. And this one still has the same design elements of columns and the header, although it is surrounding a beautiful front door. And I do like the elements on this door here. Keeping all those design ideas in mind, here's a rough sketch of what I've come up with. I like 2 fluted columns on each side, topped with a capital, and then a frieze with crown molding, and also added dental molding and a shelf to kind of match my existing door and window trim. So let's get Rachel-vating. I decided to draw out onto the wall so I could get an idea of the scale of this molding that we're installing. So I just threw it right on the wall. The molding that I tried to order is actually back ordered. And instead of going with a narrower flute molding or column, I decided that I would make my own. So this is just a sample. So I was trying to determine how wide I'd like it. Since I already ordered the capitals and these rosettes. The rosettes are 5.5 inches wide. So I need the fluting to be a little bit narrower than that. I'm going to start the install at the bottom where the wall meets the floor. That detail is called a plinth block. So I'm just going to create my own, although they can be purchased off the shelf. I used some thin plywood that I already had on hand, and I cut it to the size I wanted on the miter saw. The design that I'm creating has 2 columns, one on each side. So I need 2 plinth blocks and cut a duplicate piece of plywood. Once I have that sanded, including the edges, I get out my router and I just put a chamfer, which is an angle, on 3 of the sides. The bottom won't matter so much, it'll be covered by the carpet. And then this thin piece of plywood is going to get attached to a slightly larger and thicker block to create the plinth. Now we're just going to CA glue these together. This is the activator. I'm just going to go spray it over the kitchen sink instead of the dining room table. And I already drew an outline of where to place this. Caulk this so that the edges are nice and filled. You can't tell that it's 2 pieces. And then I'll do the other one. All right, and then we'll take it back outside and just spray primer it. There we go. All right, we've got to move the existing baseboard in order to put in the plinth block. This is just a scrap piece of wood in case I nick it. I'm going to try to use it as a guide. Let's give it a shot. I like to use a putty knife. Oh, that's coming off. That's not what we want.
to get in behind the trim. Sometimes I don't have a trim puller.
This baseboard is made of MDF, so you can kind of just tear it apart. Then just go back in with the oscillating saw to clean up the cuts.
What are the odds that there's a nail where I'm removing the baseboard? Those are long. Let's vacuum this up. And is it going to fit? It doesn't look level.
Because it wasn't very level, I just stuck a putty knife under the baseboard to raise up the right side to get the positioning right, and then I went ahead and nailed everything in place.
All right, there's our first plinth block. Since I've marked exactly where the rosette is supposed to go, I think that it'll be easier to put it up and then determine the height of the bottom fluting trim. Oh, that did not work at all. Wow, that didn't even go through. All right, let's try longer nails. All right, I loaded this with 2-inch nails. Let's see if this will work. Whoa. This wood might be too dense. Although it held, I might just go ahead and leave that there so it's held in place, and then I might, I don't know, cut the nails off, use liquid nails. Well, I'm going to cut out the other side of the baseboard like I did on this side, and then we'll work on the fluting pieces. All right, this side is not yet drawn out, so I'm going to start with that. Oh, there's the level. Tools are never where you need them. And I'm just writing on the wall because I'm going to paint after this. And also, you can easily wipe off the pencil marks. The rosette is 5.5. Oh, I think our fluting is going to be 5 1/4, which means that there's only 1/8 an inch both sides. That's why the other side was so far off, because this is not level on the carpet. All right, this time to help get the block level first, I just put a tiny piece of broken off shim under the low side. And I think it's much more level this time. Pretty close. Ear protection, check. Other thing I'm going to do is slide this over just a hair. Can always fill the gap with the caulking. Okay, let's do a tool count. How many tools did that take? We had putty knife 1, ruler 2, ear protection 3, knife 4, the actual saw 5, level 6, pry bar 7, we pulled nails out 8, vacuum 9, and do we count the pencil 10? Are we up to 10 tools? Let's call it 10. To remove one tiny piece of molding, trim base molding. And let's not forget the nail gun. So to nail it back in, let's call it 11. 11 tools for this small little job. Decided it'd be a good idea to put up the laser level so I could see if my plinth blocks were level across the wall. So you can see the line is just across the top. On this side, it's just above. So that'll need to come up a tiny bit to make them level. Okay, that's about level with the other side and level with itself. Let's see if the 2-inch nails will go in. Ooh, they do.
Just above the plinth block is the fluted column that is about 20 inches tall. So using the miter saw, I cut those 2 pieces of my fluted columns out. Again, I'm making the fluted columns because the stock I wanted wasn't available. So I need to cut 2 vertical pieces that run along the edge of each flute, and they need to be the same height. So I just use the already cut flute as a size guide. I don't have a table saw, so I used a sliding miter saw to trim off about 3/4 of an inch from each of my 2 columns. The cuts would have turned out better on a table saw, but since I don't have one, I then used my router with a flush trim bit to smooth out the edges. I just lined up the reeded trim with another piece of straight edge. Ideally, I would like to use a spray gun to paint this trim, but I have not invested in one yet. So before I take these pieces in, I am going to spray primer them with this Rust-Oleum primer here. And I just give them a couple of light, even coats and let them dry before I take them in. All right, we got all the parts cut to size, primed. So in order to mimic this molding, I prefer the reeded side. This, you can use either side. This side is the fluted side, but I like the reeded side. Thus I got the reeded paneling. So in order to mimic this, I need to space it out a little. So this is my spacer. I'm gonna put that up and then build this molding. This is when I need a level that is bigger than this one and smaller than 24 inches. Let's just see. 1/8 of an inch. Okay, let's see if it's level. I don't want to put nails in my reeded panel, so I used some CA glue and activator. I'm not sure why I didn't use liquid nails for this part. And I just hold that in place for a couple seconds and nail up the left side wooden square dowel. And here is the rosette and column and plinth block all installed for the right side. And I just repeat those same steps on the left, and there we go. Most of the pieces for the top of the headboard have been cut. They're behind me, so we're working on the frieze part of the headboard at this time. So here's a rough sketch. Let's see, there we go. So we're working on this part here. So the frieze is just a flat board, which the cheapest thing that I could find was a shelf from Home Depot. And then I have a crown molding and a dental molding. So let me show you here a little bit closer.
So I already cut the crown molding for the top of the frieze, don't know what it's called, which is this piece here, which is actually just a shelf. Cutting crown molding can be tricky. It is tricky. I have a cheat sheet that I cannot find, but I recommend that you look up how to cut crown molding. I'm sure I'll post a video at some point of cutting crown molding as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and CA glue these together so that it's ready to go. I'm not sure if I'm going to use the whole 10 inches or if I'm going to move this down a little bit. I'm just not sure how much space I have. All right, super glue. I'm going to spray this CA activator outside. Oh, looks pretty good. This is our shelf. It's about 10 inches high. This is our crown that we already assembled. That will go at the top. I marked where it's going to go here. And then it's really hard to find crown that has dental molding anymore. So I got a piece of dental molding separate. And we'll just attach it and then it'll look like that. So I'm going to assemble this and then put it up on the wall because it'll be easier than working on a ladder and overhead. So let's assemble this. So I'm adding a shelf right under the frieze. This is the shelf here. It's about 5.5 inches. And I'm just going to use pocket holes to attach it before I put it up on the wall. So I'm using the Craig pocket hole jig. I've got my boards clamped together based on the thickness of the two pieces of wood I'm screwing together determines the length of the pocket screw to use. This is a special pocket screw. The boards are about 5/8, a little under 3/4. It's recommended to use 1 1/4 inch pocket screw. So these screws are just a tad too long, but I don't have any 1-inch screws. Another piece of wood is going to be covering that up, so I'm not too worried about it. Here we have the frieze with the crown molding, dental molding, and shelf installed. At this point, I'm using caulking. This helps elevate the finish and give it a more professional appearance. I always highly recommend it. The crown molding was just tacked on with a few nails, so I add some glue between the frieze and the crown to help reinforce it. Thought enough time had passed so that my glue wouldn't drip, but shoot. Oh no, I was wrong. So it's late anyways. We will just let this glue dry and resume tomorrow.
It's the next day and I just have one last piece of shelf to add to this header. This part is purely decorative. I'm just adding this to match my existing door and window trim for a more cohesive look. I just clamp these pieces together while the glue dries.
Let's figure out and mark where our studs are. We have the frieze to hang up and it's a quite heavy piece of shelving material, so we need to find the studs. Just use your stud finder. Okay, there's one. Studs are supposed to be 16 inches apart on center. It's about where I put my tape.
The other item to complete before hanging up the frieze is to remove this small piece of trim. The frieze is going to be installed at the very top of the wall, and this trim is in the way. I'm using a razor blade to score the caulking and the paint so that when you pull this trim off, it doesn't peel off the paint. As you can see, it already happened.
So our studs are here, right? These big pencil lines, you want to just mark them?
Okay.
I got some muscle to help me with this part. We did a dry fit and then marked the placement of the studs. We then transferred the marks to the front of the frieze and will pre-drill screw holes to attach this to the wall studs.
You're just gonna make a mess right there? My goodness.
Yeah, you got a better suggestion?
You want me to vacuum as you're drilling?
I mean, if you really want.
I drilled some holes to these bottom two pieces that create the shelf. If you remember, they were only glued together, and since this is going to be installed over my head while I sleep, I don't want to take any risks and have any part of this come crashing down on me. So I used some screws to attach these two shelves together for extra insurance, while my extra muscle helped vacuum up my mess. We pre-drilled holes where we had marked for the studs, and then used a countersink bit so that the screw heads would be flush with the wood and could just be covered with wood filler and hidden. With the holes pre-drilled, it was time to install this. We used some hefty construction screws about 3 inches long. We used 4 screws and we got them all into the wall studs.
Moment of truth. And pop.
It's successfully installed and centered. So that's going to do it for this week. Be sure to come back next week so you can see how this design unfolds. Thanks for watching.